من يهده الله فلا له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. This is another lesson that we're having, reading from نصيحة للنساء لأم عبد الله الوادعية حفظه الله تعالى. And in this lesson we will enter into the first chapter, which she mentions, which is الحث على الإخلاص والمحافظة على الوقت, which is the encouragement in being sincere and preserving one's time. And the reason why she begins with sincerity is because we know that the religion is built on sincerity, as was mentioned by our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as was mentioned by Allah Azza wa Jal, where He said, ما أمروا إلا ليعبدوا الله مخلصين له الدين حنفاء ويقيموا الصلاة ويؤتوا الزكاة وذلك الدين القيم. In Surah Al-Bayyinah, Allah Azza wa Jal mentions the importance of sincerity by saying the people were not ordered except to worship Allah, being sincere for Him in the religion. And then thereafter Allah mentions the Salat and the Zakat. And likewise, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala in Surah Al-Zumar, the beginning of Surah Al-Zumar, فَعْبُدِ اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ أَلَا لِلَّهِ الدِّينُ الْخَالِصِ. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala says, so we're being sincere with the religion is to Allah Azza wa Jal. So she begins with the issue of ikhlas, an individual statements, their actions, and their intentions. They have to be sincere. And then she says, and the preserving one's time, because she's going to talk about, or she considers that an individual would take advantage of their life in learning their religion. And in order to learn the religion and to memorize that which is of benefit and to remind one another, the person has to be cautious with their time. So she mentioned the issue of time. Then she mentions the hadith of Imam al-Bukhari, or the hadith which is reported in Imam al-Bukhari, and she mentioned that it's not that with the manhaj, that was the people who studied image. The way of the people who studied in the Maj is that they memorized the hadith along with the asanid. And this is the way of Ahl al-Hadith, and that was the way Sheikh Mukbir Rahimahullah Ta'ala taught and trained his students, that they memorized the narrations of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam along with the chains of narration. So we find her mentioning the chain of narration. But the hadith is the famous hadith on the authority of Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, that the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, and there's different versions of the same hadith, so an individual should not hold it to be wrong, the version that she mentioned, that the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, Al-a'malu bin-niyyah imri'in ma nawa faman kanat hijratuhu ila Allah wa rasulihi fahijratuhu ila Allah wa rasulihi ومن كانت هجرته للدنيا يصيبها أو امرأة يتزوجها فهجرته إلى ما هاجر إليه. The famous hadith of Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, actions are by the intentions, and everyone will have that which they intended. So whoever migrated to Allah and to His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then his migration is to Allah and to His Messenger. And whoever has migrated for a worldly gain or a female to marry, then his migration is to that which he migrated. And we know that this is the first hadith which is present in the Nawawi by Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala. We make mention from time to time in their works to inform of the importance of one's intention, and that an individual must make their intention in all forms of worship and seeking nearness to Allah Azza wa Jal. They have to make their intentions sincerely for the face of Allah Azza wa Jal. How does an individual migrate to Allah? As Allah Ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. As Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, and whoever path, we will guide them. Whoever struggles in our path, we will guide them. Or whoever struggles in our cause, we will guide them to our path. Whoever struggles in our cause, we will guide them to our path. So Allah Azza wa Jalla informs that there is a path to Allah Azza wa Jalla. There is a path to Allah Azza wa Jalla. Allah Ta'ala also says in the Quran, فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ إِنِّي لَكُم مِّنْهُ نَذِيرٌ مُبِينٌ. Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, so run to Allah. And the Prophet, Allah Ta'ala informed that the Prophet to say, run to Allah, very clear warner from him. The Prophet was a clear warner from Allah, informing the people that they have to race toward, and they have to turn toward, and they have to run toward Allah Azza wa Jal. How does an individual do that? By obedience to Allah. By obedience to Allah Azza wa Jal, and learning about Azza wa Jal, learning the name attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal, calling on Allah. As Allah Ta'ala said, وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَادْعُوا بِهَا فَادْعُوهُ بِهَا. And to Allah belong the magnificent names, so call on the way of them. So we have to learn about Allah Azza wa Jal. We have to learn the names and the attributes of Allah. We have to learn that which is pleasing to Allah and distinguish between that which is displeasing to Allah Azza wa Jal. And by doing so, an individual increases in his iman when he learns about his Lord and the magnificent names and attributes of Allah. He increases in iman. He increases in taqwa because he knows his Lord Ta'ala. He knows that Allah is Ar-Rahim, Ar-Rahman, Al-Ghafur, Al-Kareem, Al-Basir, Al-Alim, Al-Hafiz, Al-Hafiz, Al-Basit, Al-Baqi. He knows all these magnificent names of Allah Azza wa Jal, all forgiving, all merciful, the all-knowing, the all-seeing, the all-kind, the generous. So he knows these names and these attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal. So this allows the individual to increase in taqwa. So this is from making hijrah to Allah Azza wa Jal. And making hijrah to his Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was done during his time while he was alive by making hijrah, and after his death by to his sunnah, meaning implementing the sunnah of being sincere in their religion and that which gains nearness to Allah Azza wa Jal. And it informs of the reward of that. So if you migrate to Allah and His Messenger, your migration is for Allah and His Messenger. And there's no doubt that which you do for Allah Azza wa Jal, you will be rewarded beyond your expectation. As Allah Ta'ala says, هَلْ جَزَاءُ الْإِحْسَانِ إِلَّا الْإِحْسَانِ. Is not the reward for a person doing good except that they would receive good. Then she goes on, and this is from her minhaj. She gives a chapter title, then she gives verses or hadiths, and in between she gives advice. She gives very, very good advice. Sometimes it's coming from her, sometimes it's coming from the ulama, and sometimes it's coming from her father. Sometimes it's coming from her father. After that hadith, she gives some of this advice. She says, وَإِنِّي أُوصِي نَفْسِي وَإِيَّاكُنَّ بِالتَّقْوَى اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ في السر والعلن وأن نجعل العمل خالصا لوجه الله الكريم وألا نعمل أي عمل رياء أو مفاخرة وأن نلتزم بديننا فإننا مسؤولات أمام الله عز وجل. She mentioned basically 3 advices. She says, or 4. She says, I advise myself and you to have fear and consciousness of Allah Azza wa Jal, whether you're in private or whether you're in public. That's the first. And that we make our actions, religious actions, we make them sincerely for the face of Allah Azza wa Jal. We make our religious actions sincerely for the face of Allah Kareem, the generous. The rest of her advice, the ulama, and from amongst them Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala. So she mentioned his complete explanation of the 40 hadith of Imam al-Nawawi, not that which is translated in the market today, because that's only his comments. It's only his comments. But the complete explanation of Al-Arba'in al-Nawawiyya by Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala, to the best of my knowledge, it hasn't been translated yet. But in that, he mentioned that a believer can get rewarded for even doing worldly actions if those actions are done for the purpose of benefiting the individual when it comes to the worship of Allah Azza wa Jalla. For example, when a man leaves his home, or being that the lesson is with a female, if she wakes up early in the morning before her husband goes to work and says, I'm going to make him a lunch. That's something worldly. Something worldly. It's not necessarily an act of worship. But if the female says that I'm going to make my husband lunch so that he can have strength, and when he has strength, he can worship Allah better. When he has strength, he can worship Allah better. Now she has turned a worldly action into an action which would benefit her husband in terms of his iman, in terms of his ibadah, so she gets rewarded for it. And it's possible that she can combine several intentions in the single act of worship in order to get the most out of it. For example, she says, he's my husband, and I know that he likes to have a lunch with him, and this is obedience to Allah. So I'm going to do it because by pleasing my husband, I'm obeying my Lord Ta'ala. So she gets rewarded for that. Then she says, and at the same time, I'm going to do it because if he has strength and energy, he can worship Allah better. So she gets reward for that. So the reality is knowing when a person can gain the most out of their actions of worship and their worldly deeds is very important. So much so, Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala, in the same explanation of Al-Arba'in al-Nawawiyya, he said the normal deeds of someone who is mindful becomes actions of worship because of his intention. Once again, he said the normal deeds of some of the people who are mindful become actions of worship based on their intentions. And then he said the opposite. And the actions of worship for the people who are heedless become normal deeds based on the lack of their intention. The actions of worship for the people who are heedless become normal deeds, which they're not rewarded for, because based on their lack of intention. They don't keep Allah in mind. They don't keep that this is pleasing to Allah. They don't keep that Allah has made this obligatory upon them. They just do it as a lip service. So it becomes an act of no benefit. Now, and continuing, so she says, and this is the third, she says, in that we should not do any action to be seen or out of pride, وأن نلتزم بديننا, and this is the fourth, and that we adhere to our religion. That we adhere to our religion. And then she says, why? After she gave those four pieces of advice, she says, why? فإننا مسؤولات أمام الله عز وجل. For verily we will be questioned in front of Allah. So let's go over it again. The first advice is I advise myself, and there's a benefit of that, is that the person should start with themselves. As Allah Ta'ala, can we think of a verse in that regard? Allah Azza wa Jalla says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara. Allah Azza wa Jalla in the Quran says, O you who believe, save yourselves and your family. So Allah Azza wa Jalla began with the individual himself. Allah Azza wa Jalla began with the individual himself. So when she says, I advise myself and you, she is in conformity to what is present in the Quran and present in the Sunnah. Likewise, the statement of Ibrahim, وإذ قال إبراهيم رب اجعل وإذ قال إبراهيم, no, the statement of وَاجْنُبْنِي وَبَنِيَّ أَن نَعْبُدَ الْأَصْنَامِ. نعم. وَاجْنُبْنِي وَبَنِيَّ أَن نَعْبُدَ الْأَصْنَامِ. Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam said to Allah Azza wa Jal, Oh Allah, protect me and my offspring from worshiping idols. So Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam began with himself. He began with himself. So she said, I advise myself, and that's not the first advice, that's a benefit of the beginning of her advice. I advise myself and you all to have taqwa of Allah Azza wa Jal in private and in public. And that was the first benefit, to have taqwa of Allah in private and in public. And she mentions private because that is the true test of taqwa. That is the true test of taqwa, that an individual displays taqwa in private even more so than they do in public. Because when an individual fears Allah, when no one is around, this is a true indication of his taqwa. Because it's many people fear or claim to fear Allah when they're in public. Many people claim to fear Allah when they're in public, but when they get behind closed door, they do that which is displeasing to Allah Azza wa Jalla. So that shows that in reality there's no taqwa. There's no taqwa of Allah. There's taqwa of the people. There's no taqwa of Allah Azza wa Jalla. There's taqwa of the people. As Allah Ta'ala says, يَسْتَخْفُونَ مِنَ النَّاسِ وَلَا يَسْتَخْفُونَ وَمَعْهُمْ يُبَيِّتُونَ مَا لَا يَرْضَى مِنَ الْقَوْلِ. Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, they hide from the people, but they do not hide from Allah. They hide from the people. They hide their deeds, their evil deeds, their transgression, their bad statements, their bad speech. They hide it from the people, but they don't hide it from Allah. Allah is with you, and Allah is with you. So that's from your su' al-i'tiqad. That's from your su' al-i'tiqad, and that is from the nifaq which is present within inside of you. When you hide your deeds from the people because you want them to have a certain impression about you, but when you get behind closed doors, it's as if Allah Azza wa Jalla does not see you. From your soul i'tiqad. Your soul i'tiqad about the fact that Allah is the all-hearing, the all-seeing. How can you disobey Allah in private? And you know Allah is the all-hearing, the all-seeing. That's one. Two, your soul i'tiqad about Yawm al-Qiyamah. Because don't you think that you're going to be resurrected? يوم عظيم يوم يقوم الناس لرب العالمين, as Allah mentioned in the Quran. Don't you realize that you're going to be resurrected for a tremendous day, the day that you stand for the Lord of the worlds? So these are indications of our weakness and our iman. When a person is not able to display either the same amount of taqwa or even greater amount of taqwa when you're in private, but you claim to be upon the correct path. Upon the correct path. Allah Azza wa Jal, behind closed doors, Allah gives you an indication of your level of iman. Allah gives you a reminder of your level of iman. Not in front of not in front of the people in the public, but in private. If you can display the same amount of taqwa or an even greater amount of taqwa, then this is a good indication. But if the meter drops from the highest, which is 10, let's say, all the way to 1, all the way to 0 when you're in private, then where is your iman? As Allah says, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتَانِ. Allah says, and for the person who fears standing in front of his Lord, he will have 2 gardens. ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامِ وَخَافَ وَعِيدِ. Allah says that, after mentioning paradise, that is for the people that fear standing in front of me, and those who fear my punishment, or my threat, those who fear my threat. Many verses throughout the Quran where Allah talks about the issue of at-taqwa. And there was a book translated in that regard, the fawaid, the benefits or the merits of taqwa. The merits of taqwa, I'm not sure if it's in Islam or in the Quran. I think the merits of taqwa in the Quran. This book was translated, and I don't know the translator nor the company, but I saw it in one of the bookstores by Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen, rahimahullah ta'ala. The benefits or the merits of taqwa in the Quran. Naam. Then she says, and that we should make our actions sincerely for the face of Allah Azza wa Jal, and you should keep that in mind in order for you to get the utmost reward in the Islamic actions of worship, and the worldly actions is that you have to be conscious that you're doing it for Allah Azza wa Jal. And that we do not do any action out of pride nor showing off. And the individual has to fight him or herself, as we mentioned in the beginning of the action, during the action, at the end of the action. Because verily Allah Azza wa Jal is in no need of an action which you have placed partners with him in the action. Doesn't mean you have to have done the action for someone else. No, look how the shaitan makes our deeds invalid. And if you pray to someone else, directly to someone else, you're mushrik. You're mushrik. But if you pray for Allah, but you begin to show off during the prayer, you begin to show off during the prayer, now this is pride, this is shirk al-asghar. This is the minor form of shirk. This is the minor form of shirk. It does not have all of your deeds considered invalid, but that deed that you're doing is considered invalid. That deed that you're doing at the moment is considered invalid unless you fight it and remove the pride from, because obviously the shaitan is going to approach the individual at any given moment. But if the person fights it and removes it from their chest, from their mind, then Allah Azza wa Jal would continue to reward the person for the deed. And that we stick to our religion. Now, as Allah Ta'ala says, وَاعْبُدُوا رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينُ. Worship your Lord until certainty comes to you, meaning death. For verily we are questioned. We will be فَإِنَّنَا مَسْئُولَاتِ. She says we are females. Mas'ulat, she uses the feminine. We are females that will be questioned in front of Allah on the day of judgment. What is her proof for that? فَفِي الصَّحِحَيْنِ مِنْ حَدِيثِ عَدِي بِنْ حَاتِمٍ. And notice we notice something. When she mentioned the first hadith, and this is just so we study a book very well. When she mentioned the first hadith on the authority of Umar ibn Khattab in Sahih Bukhari, she mentioned the full isnad. But when she mentioned this hadith, she only is mentioning the companion. Adi bin Hatim is the companion. She did not mention full isnad. So we understand from that, at times she mentions the full isnad, the full chain of narration, and other times she does not mention the full chain of narration. That the Prophet ﷺ said, مَا مِنْكُمْ أَحَدٌ إِلَّا سَيُكَلِّمُهُ رَبُّهُ لَيْسَ بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَهُ تَرْجَمَانٌ فينظر أيمن منه فلا يرى إلا ما قدم من عمله وينظر أشأم منه فلا يرى إلا ما قدم وينظر بين يديه فلا يرى إلا النار تلقاء وجهه فاتقوا النار ولو بشق تمرة. The hadith of Adi bin Hatim, one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ said, there's none from amongst you except that he will speak to his Lord on the day of judgment, and there will not be a translator between you. The person looks to the right, and he does not see except his deeds. It informs you that your deeds will be presented to you in Yawm al-Qiyamah. As Allah says, فَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَهُ وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَهُ. So that's what Allah says. Whoever does an atom's weight, and some other scholars say it's not an atom, it's the smallest ant. Whoever does the size of the smallest ant in actions, he's going to see it. Good actions or bad actions. So the person looks to the left, the person looks to the right, they only see their deeds. And the person looks to the left and they only see their deeds. And the person looks in front of them and they only see the hellfire. Because we know that there is a bridge over the hellfire, and below is the hellfire, and in front there's paradise. So the person looks in front of them and they only see the hellfire, meaning they only see, Wallahu Alam, they only see that bridge that's going over the hellfire. Then the Prophet said, so fear the fire, even it be with a portion of a date, meaning in sadaqah and the likes of that. So the point from this hadith is that she wants to inform you that all of us will be held accountable in front of Allah. Brought to account, afwan. All of us will be brought to account in front of Allah Azza wa Jal. وَتَقْوَى كَلِمَةٌ جَامِعَةٌ. It's a comprehensive statement. فهي عبارة عن طاعة الله وطاعة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والله عز وجل لم يخلقنا عبثا. And taqwa is a comprehensive statement which informs of obedience to Allah and obedience to His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And Allah has not created us out of jest. Allah has not created us out of jest. قال الله تعالى أفحسبتم أنما خلقناكم عبثا وأنكم إلينا لا ترجعون. She brings the statement of Allah in Surah Al-Mu'minun. Do you believe that we created you out of play, out of jest, and you will not return to Allah? This is a rhetorical question from our Lord Ta'ala, so that we can reflect over the fact that Allah did not create us for nothing. He did not create us so that we can eat and drink and party and the likes of that. No, Allah created us for a tremendous reason. As Allah Ta'ala says, and she's going to bring وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I have not created the jinn nor the mankind except that they worship me. And then she brings other verses in that regard. She brings the verse of Allah in Surah Al-Dukhan. She brings the verse of Allah in Surah Al-Ahqaf. She brings the verse of Allah in Surah Al-Sad, Surah Al-Hajr, or Hujr, and Surah Al-Dhariyat. All of them informing, and you can read them in the translation, and we hope the sisters have the translation of the book, all of them informing that Allah Azza wa Jal has created us for a reason. And Al-Hakim, Allah from His Asma'ul Husna is Al-Hakim, the all-wise. And Allah being all-wise means that Allah Ta'ala would not do something out of play. He would not do something for no reason. Allah Ta'ala has created us for a tremendous reason, and we know what that reason is so that we can worship Allah Azza wa Jal, not setting up any partners with Him. We will stop on this portion, and inshallah we will continue next week. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Allah knows best. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira.